Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. I've got a few number ones to talk about today, but first I wanted to tell you about a new comic shop that I stopped in at just recently. So my family and I went down to Boise, Idaho for a So You Think You Can Dance performance, part of the tour that they were doing this year. I'm a big fan of that show. And so we decided to go do that. And so on the way down there, I wanted to stop at this new shop that I had heard about on the Fight for Comics podcast. And this is Captain Comics. You can go to captain-comics.com for more information about that place. Anyway, so we went down there, and it was a nice looking place. And had a lot of all the new stuff just below on the main floor. But upstairs, and this is why I was excited about this, upstairs was a bunch of their back issues, and all of them were, or most of them I should say, were half price. And so I loaded up on a bunch of Hellblazer comics for about $2 a piece. And I got a few other comics as well. I was able to complete my Wonder Woman run from the 2006 edition. Those were only 25% off, but still, I got them for fairly cheap. So if you're ever in the Boise area, I highly recommend Captain Comics. And now on to the reviews of some number one comics. I have a few comics to talk about today from the last half of October, actually the last 3 weeks of October, since it was a 5-week month. I actually have 3 comics, one from each week. Those are the only ones that I really wanted to talk about out of the, 15 per week that I got, thereabouts, something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, so let's get right into it. But first, let me just say that spoilers there may be. I will be talking about particular plot points and specific things about the comics. So if you haven't read them and don't want to be spoiled, maybe you should go read them and then come back. First up is, these are all number ones, by the way. First up is Letter 44, number 1, from Oni Press. This is by, and I just want to mention, this was released for $1. $1 for a new comic, a new number 1 comic, from an independent publisher. I think that's just awesome. Okay, so this is by Charles Soule is the writer. The illustrator is Alberto Albuquerque. Say that 5 times fast. Guy Major is the colorist. Sean De Pascal is the letterer. Jill Beaton's the editor. And interesting, it says here, designed by Jason Story. I've talked about this before, I think. Mostly I've seen this on Image Comics. But what is a comic designer? What's going on here? I mean, if you look at the inside cover image, it looks like a letter from NASA, and that's kind of how it's presented with the credits, of course, to the comic and all the ephemera relating to the publication of the comic. But you get that kind of stuff. But as far as the rest of it, and there's something very similar, a similar looking style. For the editorial page, written by the editor. But other than that, it's just your typical comic, with panels and pages and images and words. So I don't understand the whole design aspect. But anyway, that's not really what I'm here to talk about. So this is the premise of the comic. So it says, approved for release by NSA. It is Inauguration Day, and America is about to embark upon the next phase of its journey through history. Stephen Blades, the president-elect, campaigned on a platform of new possibility for the country, promising sweeping reforms to the policies of his predecessor, the outgoing president, Francis T. Carroll. Sound familiar? To a country fatigued from 8 years of war and economic uncertainty, Blades was a breath of fresh air. But wanting to be president and actually being president are two very different things. All of the secrets hidden from ordinary citizens suddenly come to light, and the world you thought you knew changes forever. President-elect Stephen Blades is about to learn the biggest secret of them all. So again, like I said, sound familiar? So basically the premise is, or the idea is, what happens after a president takes us into a war that in the Middle East that we didn't necessarily need to be there for, or if you feel like I do that we didn't need to be there at all, but he did it for a purpose. And the purpose here is that NASA discovered that there's some mining operation going on in the asteroid belt. And as far as we know, we America, we the president, Carroll, knew nobody on Earth is out there, and nor could they be given the level of technology. So he initiated these wars in the Middle East so he can pump money into R&D and prepare our soldiers for what may come, which is pretty damn smart. If you assume that the aliens are potentially hostile. So that premise right there, I think, is really interesting. So you couple that with the new guy coming in, the president-elect Stephen Blades, who knows nothing about this until he reads, the letter, and that's where you get the title of the comic, Letter 44. So traditionally, an outgoing president will write a letter to the incoming president. And as far as I know, those don't ever get released. But you have to wonder what these presidents, especially presidents where there's a lot of contention in their presidency, and perhaps the new guy coming in was really attacking the guy's record. Again, sound familiar? So he reads this letter and finds this information out. So of course, on his first day of office, he brings the Joint Chiefs together to find out, one, if this is really true and not some sort of hoax put on by his predecessor, which it turns out, of course, to be true. Otherwise, this would be a pretty short comic, I think. Anyway, he contacts the crew that is 150 million miles away from Earth. And there's this great, the first page is really great because it shows an image of the Earth and the Moon in space, and talks about that distance. So before this, mankind hadn't ever gotten further than the moon. Fly to the moon and back 300 times, something we only pulled off 9 times with the Apollo missions, and you still wouldn't be that far. 150 million miles. This far from home, you aren't even part of the human race anymore. You're something else. And of course, they're going out there to meet this something else. So I thought that was a nice little bit of dichotomy there, and comparison to what is it to be human? That's the basic question for any kind of literature, any kind of art. What does it mean for us to be human? How do we look at ourselves? How do we look at other things? So Charles Soule is fast becoming one of my very favorite writers for this level of quality and depth to his work in a quote unquote comic book, right? So he contacts the crew. We find there's some interesting characters here, including basically the crew is some military types and some scientists. Oh, they named the ship that they built the Clark, which I love that. Which of course was named by the scientist. For those that may not know, this is for Arthur C. Clarke, the writer, the science fiction writer. So they're coming up on what do they call it? There's a threshold. Basically, the aliens have this, I'll just call it a bubble, because I can't find the right word that they used in here. But they have this bubble that's basically, we can't really scan them, or nothing's getting out, other than images, of course. But they're coming up on what they call the terminus, crossing the terminus at the very end of the comic, and so that's what happens. But the female lead of the story is, I'm not finding it off the bat. Oh, Charlotte. That's her name, Charlotte. Anyway, she's pregnant out here. There's a relationship going on here. The crew is very protective of her, which that'll be an interesting plot point as we go forward. Anyway, so the comic ends with the Earth ship, like I said, crossing that terminus and then encountering the alien vessel, which looks really interesting. It reminds me of some of the designs I've seen put forth by NASA for how we could travel interstellarly, where there's a dish that appears to be collecting stuff so that they can travel, to get the energy to travel. That's what I'm assuming anyway. So we'll see what happens here. Really, really good book. The Albuquerque art is good enough. The faces, kind of, especially the noses, they look kind of blocky and kind of very similar. But everybody has a distinct look. Besides that, it's really heavy on inks, especially in the parts where the president is reading the letter. But that kind of makes a lot of sense, I think, looking back on the past and considering the shadowy quality of what the previous President Carroll, why he did what he did. So I like that. I'm looking forward to reading more of this. It looks to be a really good comic, and if you haven't picked this up, you might want to pick it up, or again, wait for the trade. Either way. Next up, for the 4th week of October, I have for you an Image comic, Velvet #1. This was not for $1. It was $3.50, but well worth the money. Let's see here. This is by Ed Brubaker as the writer. Steve Epting is the artist. Elizabeth Breitweiser doing colors, with Chris Eliopoulos doing the letters. All right. This was a lot of fun too. All 3 of these comics I'm going to talk about. Really, really fun to read, and I really enjoyed them all. This is a spy story with the main character being Velvet Templeton, who is the white striped, well, she's got a white stripe of hair, white lock of hair coming down, to show her age, because she is a bit older. This is set in 1973. It's very James Bondish, from the 60s and 70s James Bond movies. Like I said, it's a spy story. You have, what are they called? The agents are called, they're called X, number, X33, X22, things like that. Let's see. The spy agency, it's ARC 7. Not sure what ARC means. I'm not sure if we found out what ARC means here. Oh, X operatives. So X, like I said, X number. They are, as it says here, because ARC agents are the best. They're so good, most of the intel community has never even heard of us. Or if they have, we're more like a legend. The, quote, secret remnant of an Allied espionage group from World War II. And the story opens with one of the ex-operatives being murdered. And then, of course, ARC 7 goes into let's find out what happened here mode. And we get introduced to the main character, Velvet Templeton, who is the secretary of the director of ARC 7. And her job is to go through all the reports that the head of security is sending to the director and highlighting all of the bits that are pertinent. What you find out about Velvet, or V, some people call her in here, is that she has been involved with a number of agents over the years, and in fact, back in 1968. Yes, 1968, she had a fling with the operative X-14. He has a name, but I don't remember it at the moment. They have a fling in 1968, and then of course it's now 5 years later. She also was an operative. His name is Keller, Jefferson Keller. What she finds during her highlighting of all these pertinent documents is that basically they're getting nowhere real fast, but then the security guy comes back and says it's one of our own, who's an ex-agent, and so they're going to go find out. So it looks like he was in Paris on a fake passport. He left less than an hour after the shooting. His bank accounts are nearly empty. like they're wiring money to Switzerland before they disappear. So it looks like this guy, this ex-agent, 10 years out from field activity, is the guy. Lancaster is his name. Velvet doesn't buy it and tells the director so. And he says, I hate to say it, but I've seen better men turned, as have you. And then there's a panel, where as he's saying this, she's looking at him. But then as soon as he says that, she kind of looks away, disturbed. So, what's going on there? So, and there's a lot of little tidbits like that, which I really, really enjoy. So, because Velvet doesn't think that this smells right. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention, she has a photographic memory. So she's collected all this data, and that's kind of why she thinks that this doesn't smell right. So she's got all those bits of data floating around her head of things that she's read, and that's really the reason why she is the director's secretary, because she has that ability. It comes in handy, I would think. Anyway, she decides to take matters into her own hands. You know how that works out, right? In these kind of premises. She decides to go find Lancaster, and when she gets to where he's at, she finds the guy murdered, and there's blood everywhere in the room. And then, of course, the security guy comes in with his men, finding her over the dead body, and makes an assumption. She, of course, gets away because what this security guy doesn't know is that she was an active agent, and she was really, really good. And anyway, the issue ends with her leaping out of a window with a really cool, it looks really good. The Steve Epting art on this is really excellent. Speaking of that, like I said, the art is really good. It's really moody, nice, where in letter 44, the blacks were used to denote maybe the mood and maybe a frame device for the past. The darks in here, the shading is really reflective again of the mood, but it really complements the whole spy genre very well. The whole clandestine nature of spy stories. So that works really well. But the characters themselves show up very clear and rendered very well. The likenesses here are excellent. Everyone looks different. Velvet herself is, and this is one thing I particularly like about certain artists when they do this well, is that the character's face looks the same no matter what angle you're looking at. When we go to the past, she looks a little bit younger, and it's not just the color of her hair. The different females look different, the different hairstyles, different nose shapes, and the same goes for the guys. Steve Epting is really, really good. Did a really good job. And of course, the color artist, Elizabeth Breitweiser, did a fantastic job as well with what we have here. So again, another great comic. If you haven't picked this up, you really, really should. Don't wait. Go buy it. And then finally, from Vertigo, I have Sandman Overture #1. The extra size issue for $4.99. This is by Neil Gaiman, of course, coming back to the Sandman stories that made him famous, not just in the comic book community. That's kind of selling him short. He went from the comic books and successfully turned into a very successful novelist and short story writer, in the mainstream. But this is him returning to his Sandman roots to tell the story of how the Sandman, as we saw him in the issue #1, what was that, back in 88, 89? I don't remember now. He was captured by the villain of the story in that first issue. This is the story of how he got there. So it's a prelude, a prequel, but Gaiman hasn't lost his touch, which I had no doubt. But can you successfully come back to a property that you left, years ago? When did that end? I want to say the mid 90s, I think. So anyway, but it's been a long time. Can you come back to that? Do you still have your voice? will us readers be receptive to this? All I can say is this reader is. This was a fantastic first issue, an opening shot for this story. This, I think it's 6 issues? Oh, I don't remember. Anyway, it was supposed to be bi-monthly, but because of some problems, not problems, because of Neil Gaiman's, and this is from him, Neil himself, because of his book tour, things kind of got out of hand and he didn't get to the script, I guess. Anyway, brilliant story. I'll get into the particulars in a minute, but let me talk a little bit about the J.H. Williams III art. So when I heard that Neil Gaiman was coming back to tell a Sandman story, I'm like, okay, sign me up. And then I found out J.H. Williams III was doing the art. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be fantastic. And guess what? I'm not surprised. But I am surprised because it's so good. But I wasn't surprised that it was so good. You get your, J.H. Williams III, if you know of his work, he does a lot of interesting panel layouts on the page. You get that as well. But it fits organically with what we're being shown. The opening bits is Dream shows up on this planet where there are sentient plants. And the panels are kind of oddly shaped, kind of like a plant would be, kind of growing at interesting angles and curves through the page. And then the bit, so Dream shows up on this planet. He says there's something wrong here. Everything's right, but something's wrong. And then that dream burns up. But as the page shows, again, you kind of get that bit of wavy, chaotic-looking fire bit. But it's very organic and flows with what we're being shown. So I love that about J.H. Williams III's work. But that's not all. Oh, and then the Corinthian shows up in the story, and then you get all the panels that are shaped like his teeth, which is brilliant. But the thing I like about J.H. Williams III also is that he doesn't do one style. So depending on the story element, I'll say, his art changes somewhat. So you get this bit where the Corinthian shows up in London in 1915, where Dream has an office, which he forgot he had, which is brilliant. Dream has offices. I love that idea. Anyway, but the artwork is very, it has a black and white quality to it, which I think is fitting for the time. And then Destiny shows up, looking at his book, and he has a conversation with Death. But again, so then we get a page panel layout where it's Destiny looking at his book, and then the pages of the book become the panels. Just looks cool, really cool. Anyway, again, there's a conversation between the Corinthian and Dream. The Dream decides that he's going to kill or uncreate the Corinthian. And you get this great. So George is the receptionist assistant to Dream in his London office, and he has this. So George is dreaming, but he's serving as Dream's assistant, like I said, which has come up before in the Sandman series, but I just love that concept. Anyway, he's got everything looks very proper British for that time about George, except his face. His face is a cage. I love that. So Dream tells Corinthian the bad news, so he's about to uncreate him, but then Dream gets pulled away. Corinthian goes off, and he says he's going to run and hide basically from Dream, and that story does end up coming to fruition in the Sandman series, if I recall correctly. Anyway, Dream, like I said, he's being pulled away, but he stops in in his realm to get his battle armor and that Sandman looking helmet that we've seen before. You get to see Lucius again. You get to see Merv, which I love those characters. Anyway, he gets pulled across the universe. It says here, I'm pulled halfway across the universe in one fraction of forever with a pain that feels like birth. It's a great image. And then you get, it's a 4-page spread. It just pulls out showing all these other dream characters. And, one's like, what kept you? And you are late. We've been waiting for you. We answered the call promptly as our duty bade us. And Dream's like, huh? But what's really interesting about that, and that's how the issue ends, basically. But what's really cool, if you look at all these designs of these other dream characters, which, that is an interesting concept. So what does that really mean? I've always thought that these constants, dream, death, destiny, destruction, desire, delirium, and I'm forgetting one of them. I thought that they were universal constants. Now they took many different forms depending on who the viewer was, but the idea that there are other separate, I think, constructs, separate characters, that's a new one. I don't think that was ever talked about in the original series. So, and I have to wonder too, are some of these, like there's a guy with his head's kind of moon-shaped, which that works pretty cool for Dream. One's a cat, which we have seen Dream appear as a cat in a cat's dream. So, I don't know, I'm confused and intrigued by this stuff. But anyway, I have to wonder: have we seen some of these characters before in DC Comics, or maybe other pieces of literature that Gaiman and Williams are pulling from? Just the idea just really intrigues me. So anyway, next issue, a concatenation of dreams. So apparently that's what you call a group of dreams. So again, another great comic. I'm getting this, of course, in single issues. I actually bought. Okay, here's the thing. So I bought this with the J.H. Williams cover. I also bought the Dave McKean variant cover for issue number 1. I'm not going to get any more of those because I'm going to get the trade, which will include all the covers, I'm assuming, I hope. I also got the special edition, which highlights the artwork of J.H. Williams in it. DC's been doing these special editions. So, like I said, this is supposed to come out every other month. So, issue 1 comes out, and then the next month the special edition comes out. Issue 2 comes out, then the special edition is supposed to come out. Anyway, I'm only going to get the special edition for the first issue just to see how this looks. But again, I'm going to get this in trade so I can put it on my shelf and I can pull it off and read it anytime because it's going to look gorgeous. I'm going to get the hardcover. It's going to look gorgeous. Anyway, that's it. Those are 3 comics that I wanted to talk about here that came out in the last part of October. Let me know if you've read these, let me know what you think about them. If you haven't read them, like I said, please, I really recommend all 3. I highly recommend them. You should go check them out. Anyway, let me know what you think about these particular issues. If you'd like to leave feedback on this episode, please do so by emailing longboxreview@gmail.com. You can also leave voicemail at 208-953-1841. Leave comments about individual episodes at the blog at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. You can also find Longbox Review on Stitcher. The Longbox Review podcast is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.